Hello and welcome to the Bubb Report. Last week, the government of Grenada shepherded a 1.32 billion EC dollar budget in its parliament. The first that was presented by the island's newly minted finance minister Gregory Bowen. The post-COVID budget outlined the government's plans for the 2021 fiscal year. It also reflected in many respects the precarious economic position that the island now finds itself, due in part to the economic fallout from COVID-19, as well as previous macroeconomic management issues. The budget also projects to spend more than 133 million EC dollars, or 10% of total expenditure, in the Ministry of Infrastructure Development, Transport and Implementation, whereas it only plans to invest 18.6 million, or 1.5% of total spending, in agriculture, lands and forestry. The expenditure for the health sector has been budgeted at $94.9 million.
Mr. Speaker, Grenada's solid fiscal position weakened considerably in the first half of 2020, as revenues declined sharply and expenditure needs grew to cushion the economic blow dealt by COVID-19. The combined effect resulted in a serious strain on government's finances.
In 2020, Grenada's GDP fell to a whopping negative 12.2%, although the International Monetary Fund predicts an upward trend in 2021, with real growth projected at 6.25%.
Recovered revenues, $653.8 million. Total grants, $263.6 million. Current expenditure, $629.6 million. Capital expenditure, $305.6 million. Current account surplus, $23.9 million. Principal repayments, amortization, $297.4 million. Primary surplus after grants, $45.5 million, 1.5% of GDP. With a current deficit of the grant, $18.2 million, 0.6% of GDP.
Also, for the first time in Grenada's post-independence history, the opposition leader did not present a timely rebuttal to the budget. According to MP for St. George Northeast, Tobias Clement, he did not receive the estimates of revenue and expenditure in time to offer a rebuttal on Friday.
In terms of the presentation of the budget, opposition have always been given 2 days. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. But Mr. Speaker, we are deliberating today, and I will have to come back on Friday. This does give me 1 day. I remember in the finance committee meeting, I made reference to the amount of time level, and it's such a comprehensive budget, Mr. Speaker. Over 600 pages. It has to be done electronically. It cannot be printed again. I did ask that I be given 2 days as the norm established.
However, the current Prime Minister made the same complaint in 2012 when he was the then leader of the opposition and Nazim Burke was the Minister of Finance.
A document of 500 odd pages with numbers, as you know, that are in it, requires deep thought and time. And for this document to be presented to honorable members of the House, some cases the evening before or the morning of the Finance Committee meeting, we believe that the Minister of Finance and the government side would have cheated themselves of an opportunity for discourse and advices we have consistently given over the years.
Today on the Bubb Report, we examine the socio-economic and political implications of the 2021 budget, with a diverse panel from across Grenada's civic and political society. We welcome our guests, Jerry Rappaport, the Executive Director of the Grenada Hotel and Tourism Association, Senator Andre Lewis, the Trade Union Representative in the Senate, Senator Roderick Sinclair, the Farmers Representative in the Senate, Civil Society Representative Dr. Stephen Fletcher, Laurel Bain, economist, and entrepreneur Dylan Charles. Today's program would also feature opposition leader Tobias Clement and Mr. Ron Redhead of the National Democratic Congress. It's Sunday, December 6, 2020, and we welcome you to another edition of the Bubb Report.
A pleasant good morning to our viewers and listeners, and we welcome you to this very special live event of the Bubb Report, in which we will be dissecting and analyzing the 2021 Grenada budget. But before we get to today's panel, the Bubb Report wishes to observe yet another grim milestone with respect to COVID-19 here in the United States. Yesterday alone, 2,857 Americans died as a result of COVID-19. That is almost the same number of citizens who died on 9/11 in New York City, which brings the total COVID-19 death toll in the United States to just over 281,000 people. We remember those who lost their lives to this highly infectious disease. Folks, let us please mask up and stay safe. Now let us turn to the business of the day. Before we welcome our first panel for this morning, we have to let you know that we did reach out to Ministers Oliver Joseph, Gregory Bowen, and Anthony Boson to appear this morning. Joseph indicated that he had a scheduling conflict, but will gladly make a future appearance on the Bubb Report. Bowen indicated he was unavailable today, but he also indicated that he will commit to make a future appearance. Mr. Boson indicated that because they're still in the business of debating the budget, that he will not be able to appear. As I've said on multiple occasions, this platform seeks to ensure that all voices are heard equally and that we are encouraging inclusive discussions here. So let me now turn to the panel. Let me welcome the folks for this morning's discussion. Laurel Bain, economist, Andre Lewis, the Labor's representative in the Senate, Jerry Rappaport of the Grenada Hotel and Tourism Association, Senator Roderick Sinclair, the Farmers and Fishermen's representative in the Senate, and Dr. Stephen Fletcher, a representative of the grouping of civil society organizations in Grenada. Panel, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Morning. All right, very well.
Yes.
All right, so I want to begin with Ms. Bain. Now, Ms. Bain, I must first acknowledge, as a matter of fact, that you actually produced a program with my late mentor, George Grant, that was aired on George Grant's platform. Certainly, I want to first give you the opportunity to reflect on George Grant's legacy, because usually at this time of year, George Grant actually produced a program of a similar nature, for similar import, analyzing the Grenada budget. Laurel.
Yes, thank you, Helen. Good morning to all, good day to all viewers and listeners. We operated with George Grant on the fiscal alert with the Bain sisters. Mm-hmm. And George Grant became like a father figure to us, mentoring us both professionally and how to go along within the media world. So he took us under his wings and guided us through as we presented on fiscal issues confronting Grenada and the region in the broader context. Mm-hmm. So in that manner, I would like to say, we reflect back on the life, the contribution of George Grant in an area where you are required to present facts presented in a professional manner, welcoming all views. Persons are allowed to debate. And I saw this as being very important for the development of any country as we reflect on the legacy of George Grant.
Absolutely, and that was George's legacy. George, he saw his role as incorporating as much voices as possible to essentially raise the bar with respect to public discourse and public discussion. Now, turning to the 2021 budget, the government in the 2021 budget speech, they didn't play, and this is from Ms. Bain, to raise any new taxes in spite of the revenue shortfall that they experienced in 2020. Now, given the drop in revenue that the government experienced, Ms. Bain, what are your thoughts on how important a role the National Transformation Fund would play in attempting to fund a lot of the projects that the government talks about in this budget?
I think it is very critical. As we see, we are in a period of what we call recession. And during that period, what you want is the injection of funds in the economy. So you do not expect new taxes during that period. Actually, during that period, you look for more reduction in taxes. The fiscal position will be tight, so you need an injection of funds. So the National Transformation Fund should play a very critical role in funding the capital program. And the capital program makes provision for funding from the National Transformation Fund. The critical thing, though, however, is throughout the presentation, we noted that approximately 60% of the financing grants came from the National Transformation Fund. However, the operation of the fund, the state of the fund was not presented, I would say, with clarity. So you could assess the resources available for the financing of the capital program. And I will stop here because this is just one element of the capital program I want to highlight as it relates to financing from the National Transformation Fund. The point is you need injections of funds in the economy, and it is a source of fund, but the availability, how much, was not presented.
Right, now Ms. Bain, you in your 2020 discussion on the budget, this 2020 budget discussion that you had, you raised concerns with respect to the debt to GDP ratio, or the sustainability or lack thereof of government's ability to finance these debts. Given that sharp drop in revenue that we witnessed this year, and given the economic slowdown that Grenada also witnessed this year, due in part to these external shocks, how do you proceed, or how do you perceive the current state of the debt to GDP ratio?
Yes. The debt to GDP ratio currently is estimated at 69% of GDP. And this is an increase, a sharp increase compared to 2019, where it was estimated to be 58% of GDP. Now it has trended upward. At this point, I would say the issue is, one of the critical issue is the financing or the capacity to repay debt. And I would just want to link that, first of all, to what we expect in terms of fiscal performance. In 2021, we expect to have a deficit overall of negative $18 million. This $18 million does not include our principal repayments of $287 million. So it means that we have a financing requirement in 2021, almost $300 million, and that impacts on the debt. Now, when we look at the 2021 budget also, our principal repayment estimated at $297 million, and our interest payments estimated at $63 million, brings our debt servicing requirement to almost to about $360 million. This represents approximately 55% of our budgeted domestic revenue. So one of the challenge along with the level of the debt is our capacity to repay the debt. And this has to be looked at.
Well, Ms. Bain, let me unpack that a bit, because with respect to capacity to pay the debt, now the argument from the government side would be, from central government would be that they do have the ability to refinance the terms and conditions under which they're paying the debt, so as to ensure that it becomes sustainable. Now, the IMF has also given Grenada credit for servicing its debt. So how does what you're saying comport with the message that is coming from central government?
Right. The debt had moved from 57% of GDP, which was a comfortable ratio. Now we are looking at the decline in GDP that brought it to 69% of GDP. So now we are looking at a different dynamics and a different economic environment. So in terms of capacity, I'm looking at forward-looking. Okay. Forward-looking in terms of capacity. And you had mentioned that you could renegotiate your debt. And this is a possibility. And it happens in many countries when the capacity to repay the debt is challenging. And in the Grenada situation, we had these instances because we restructured in 2005. We restructured in 2015. So once it reaches, the tendency, the trend is getting higher. We have to be very cautious in terms of the debt. We have to ensure that expenditures are efficient and effective, and we have to manage the debt properly. Okay. Kenan, I want to add here, because I don't want to leave it like that. Yes. In terms of when we look at the medium-term economic strategy for Grenada, it proposes that debt will be reduced in 2021, the debt to GDP ratio, to 65% of GDP. But this is highly dependent on achieving a growth rate of 6%. Which is what the IMF is predicting. Right. Yeah. And then ensuring that the level of debt does not increase rapidly. So it is based on assumptions that we need to look at to see if these assumptions hold as you go along. And to mention one other point, within 2022, we see an aggressive strategy based on the medium-term fiscal framework to generate surpluses on the government account by containing the growth of expenditure. In particular, operational expenditure is projected to decline from 19% of GDP to 16% of GDP, increasing the surpluses and reducing the debt. However, for this to happen, these projections must occur and they must be realistic, taking into consideration the environment in which we operate. All right, as we're talking about, contractions in expenditure, I want to bring in Senator Lewis. But Senator Lewis, before I ask my question, I want you to listen to what the current Minister of Finance said about your public sector unions with respect to your demands in this environment. So I'm going to play this clip and I'll get you to respond.
Government has made an appeal to public sector trade unions regarding a deferral of negotiated salaries increases for 2021, estimated to add $13.4 million to the wage bill. Further, government is appealing for restraint in making any demands for wage and salary increases in 2021. Mr. Speaker, these measures could go a long way in helping to preserve jobs in both the public and private sectors. In this extended period, economic uncertainty.
Senator Lewis, what say you?
Okay, well, once
Was
again,
the minister unreasonable there?
well, let me just say once again, good morning to everyone.
Yes.
And interestingly enough, Kelon, that quotation is one of the exact things that I have in front of me to address, right? So we need to go a bit further. First of all, we also need to establish that there's absolutely no doubt that workers have always been the ones who have been called upon to make sacrifice upon sacrifice upon sacrifice. Mm-hmm. Yes. We need to bear the following in mind also, that as part of the recovery for economy, the aspect of consumption is important. The aspect of spending is important. And therefore, the government has an extremely important role to play in ensuring that workers continue to receive their salary, that jobs have been created, so that, because the general workforce do not engage much in saving. We do a lot of spending. So that is very important. So let me specifically address that. Assuming that government did not budget to pay the 13.4 million, because this is what they have advanced as the expenses that will, well, the investment, because salary, we see this as an investment, right? To the workers, 13.4 million. Yet still, even with that, they have projected a current account surplus of 45.5 million for 2021. Mm-hmm. It's current account surplus. So that even if you add on, or you take away 13.1 million from the 45.5 million current account surplus, you still end up with 32.1 million in surplus. But that is on the basis that we are making an assumption that the government did not cater for the increases in the budget. One will also need to bear in mind whether or not the 13.4 million is a correct actual reflection of what the 4% agreed upon. That has been signed, so there's no doubt. Let us establish the following. There's absolutely no doubt that government have 4% increases for public sector workers. There's no doubt about that. But that is also on the assumption that the government there may not be certain positions within the public sector that has not been filled. And therefore, the 13.4 million would need to be interrogated to be interrogated further. Mm-hmm. Workers have always been prepared to make sacrifices. We are concerned about the preservation of jobs. We are concerned, especially in the private sector where there have been some losses of jobs, that there will be a heavier demand on the public sector workers, and therefore the need for that increase becomes more and more important. We also need to bear the following in mind, that as has been said by our comrade, president of the Grenada Union of Teachers, speaking on behalf of the teachers, but being reflective of what the public servants are experiencing or had experienced. It is only 3 years ago or thereabouts, 2018 to 2020, 2 years ago about, the workers' salaries were docked and people had to survive Christmas with in some instances, with little or nothing to spend. So for us, we are always interested in engagement, but there are a number of outstanding matters that needs to be addressed. And key among them is the docking of the public sector workers' pay. But the key aspect here has to do with the current account surplus of 45.5 million, I think. And if salary increases is budgeted or will be 13 point something million, it will still leave you with an additional 32 point something million. But it is important, Kellon, to have spending power. And the government is in that critical position to ensure that once the workers' salaries are increased, there will be more spending power, which will be the multiplying effect, as you will know, and the economists who know better than me, is extremely important for economic activities.
But the government may say that they are investing in serious capital projects to get the economy going as a stimulus. They're talking about enhancements to, well, not enhancements, but much more investment in the construction sector. As a matter of fact, this budget is projected to spend more in that sector So their argument might be, and maybe the economist, I'll bring in Laurel here again, and then I'll get to Jerry in a second. But again, in the budget, a lot of the public expenditure will be going towards these capital projects. Would not that be a form of stimulus?
Yes, Kalan, just if I may just jump in here, because
Yes.
I am yet to see, and Sister Laurel can help me here, which country or countries economy has significantly developed as a result of what you call projects.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I know that there is an urgent need to address the immediate issues that we have, but also one of the major challenges will be that of implementation. And a cursory look at our implementation rate over the past few years has left a lot to be desired. And even in the context of the government looking to put a freeze on hiring, yes, how would these be implemented? How would this be managed? And we need to ensure that we are not just making pronouncement for the sake of making pronouncement. Even in this crisis period, it is important to be informed by our past experiences.
Right. So, Kelon,
yes.
If I can come in here just to support, I think it's Dr. Fletcher.
Andre, yeah, Senator Lewis. Yeah.
Senator Lewis. If we look back and say just 2 years previously, this year capital expenditure is $305 million.
Mm-hmm.
And if that is spent, it will be good. But if we look back at our historical past, we see that there is significantly capacity constraint in achieving that expenditure. In the 2020 budget, capital expenditure was estimated for $225 million, and expenditure was $122 million. And in the previous year, 2019, the budget made provisions for about $196 million in capital expenditure, and $100 million was spent. So there is this capacity constraint in terms of implementing the capital program and the capital projects being stimulating enough to stimulate the economic growth. Also, I want to just comment on the issue of the projects. I think the budget, it is very aggressive in terms of the project, the growth and employment in terms of that context. But I think it is a wonderful opportunity at this point in time to look at the economy and incorporate, as we go along, programs that will sustain economic growth by transforming our structures as we go along. As we push for growth, we push aggressively for economic transformation, sustainable growth.
Okay. All right. We will take a break. We're having a very spirited discussion. And when I come back, I want to hear from, we also have Senator Ron Redhead here. Senator, welcome. We will have you in the wind shortly. But I want to, when we get back from the break, I want to have a discussion with Dr. Fletcher, Jerry, and Roderick. Folks, stay with us. We'll be right back.
I want to touch on Grenada very quickly, which is also a similar story where a crisis had to be, a crisis scenario had to be reached before the government would take on fiscal discipline as a serious measure. Grenada too had gone through a series of IMF programs prior to the 2014 program. And it was near crisis in 2014, but the expansion in public debt began way back in 2004 when Hurricane Ivan happened. The public debt started growing. As you can see, it was 40% and it reached as high as 110% at its peak in 2014 when the program with the IMF, the ECF began. And then again, it was the country that came together to build a fiscal responsibility and institutionalized fiscal discipline. And similar story where a homegrown monitoring committee was created. In the case of Jamaica, EPOC, or the Economic Program Oversight Committee, was created in the first program, which has been further broadened for other oversight committees in the standby arrangement. And the results for Grenada are, as again the chart shows, they are on the right trajectory to meet their debt targets as entrenched in the fiscal responsibility law, which is also 60% of GDP. To us, just for to be clear, the fiscal responsibility laws do have flexibility in terms of if there are natural disasters, or if primary balance, the course correction is needed. How can the course be corrected? And in the case of Jamaica, there's the Auditor General takes a close look to determine whether the budget or the supplementary budgets are in line with the goals of the fiscal responsibility law. And in Grenada, there is FROC, what they call the FROC, or the Fiscal Responsibility Oversight Committee, which also takes accountability and holds the government accountable to the targets set in the fiscal responsibility law. And the results in the case of Grenada, the debt is on a downward trajectory, on track to meet the debt target. Fiscal sustainability is being restored. In the case of Grenada, growth has been, there were significant highs for the first 2 years of the program. There are other factors that are more specific to Grenada, such as the citizenship by investment and a few other idiosyncratic factors which feature in the story on Grenada. And
All right, welcome back, folks. And I want to continue this discussion with Mr. Jerry Rappaport, and then I would get to Senator Roderick Sinclair, the farmers and fishermen's representative in the Senate. But Mr. Rappaport, the tourism industry in Grenada is certainly hurting. Yes? Would you agree with that assertion?
Oh,
Jerry, we can. Yes, go ahead.
The entire world.
Yes. Now, with respect to the budget, how do you react to the budget?
I mean, it's obvious. Well, the way I look at the budget is, to me, it's always about how the money's spent. You know what I mean? In actuality, and not just in a budget. And obviously, we're in a situation where everybody's revenue is going to be cut in terms of what each ministry is going to get. And it's just important to me to see that the money is, in terms of tourism, is used in an appropriate manner, because it's going to be a long haul back for tourism to get back to the levels it was at prior to the pandemic. At the same time, I think it's very important. One of the things that's concerning me presently is a sense of that we have to rewrite the book, reinvent the wheel. When in fact, when you look at the sector prior to COVID-19, we were in a very healthy state, and there has been continual growth in tourism. So for me, the real issues are, how do we go forward? What is the proper approach? What are the projects that are coming on stream? How are they in keeping with the product that we're offering in the world, and how we're defined? Those are the critical issues that I see in front of us.
You said that you're concerned about reinventing the wheel. Can you unpack that statement? What do you mean by reinventing the wheel?
Well, I just think that, the GTA was functioning really well. The GHTA was doing, good things in conjunction with the GTA and the ministry. And there's a sense that I have that from what I'm hearing in conversations that I've had, that there's the feeling of that we have to reinvent everything, that the strategies that worked before are not relevant today. And obviously there are major changes in the industry due to COVID-19. But at the same time, I think it's important to always to keep in perspective where we fit in the world. And as we witness, we can try all we want to get our properties open and ready for tourism. And then you can have a situation like what happened in the UK, where all of a sudden they shut down the flights out of the UK and nobody can reach Grenada from the UK. So, we're just part of a big world machine. We're one little cog in it, obviously. And we have to conscious of that. I think, it's something that drives us all at a time. But when with the point I'm trying to make is that, we, over the last 5-6 years, since the inception of the Pure Grenada brand, there's been a continual growth of tourism in Grenada, and I don't think that just because we've hit a pandemic, we all of a sudden have to start changing the dynamic. It concerns me a little bit personally of the combination of the CBI program with tourism more. I see the linkages, but at the same time, I think it's important that the two realities remain separate. So those are what I'm referring to.
Okay. Now, Mr. Rappaport, my other question to you is with respect to the budgetary consultations. I know that the Ministry of Finance embarks on an annual consultative process. Were you consulted in putting this budget document together as an association?
We were involved in some consultations, yes, for sure.
And were your suggestions included in the main document, in the estimates?
Some yes and some no. I mean, I was also involved in an agricultural subcommittee for coming out of COVID, and some of the things that we discussed showed up in what eventually made it to cabinet, and some didn't. So I mean, look, I if you're asking, do we feel included? That fluctuates. Like in any relationship,
It fluctuates. I like the way that you frame that.
Well, it's like any relationship that you have. There are good times and there are bad times. Better times than others, and whatnot. But I've always been a believer that the private and public sectors have to work together. Neither one can do it alone. And like in every other relationship, you got to be willing to put the work in. It's like a marriage. I mean, a marriage is an ongoing thing. You got to work on it every day to make it really work, right? And that's what I feel about the relationship that the private sector and tourism has with the government. There's times when we're really in sync, and there's other times when we're not, because sometimes we question things from our perspective that the government doesn't agree with, and vice versa. And that's natural. And I think it's healthy, quite frankly. I think the worst case you can end up with in anywhere is when you have everybody sitting in a room and you're just yesing everybody. I think it's really important that
when you said yesing everybody.
Yeah, I mean, it's like what
Mr.
you just saw
4
years in America with Trump. He surrounded himself with a bunch of people, who every time they sat in a cabinet meeting, they spent the first 3 minutes of every cabinet member spoke saying, "Oh, I want to thank you, Mr. President, for the wonderful job you're doing." And yes, Mr. President. Yes, Mr. President. That's not the way I believe government should work. I believe government should work. It should be a meeting of minds and dialogue, and a respect for each other's opinion, and recognizing that we're not always going to agree, but it doesn't mean that that we can't work towards a consensus, by listening to each other. I think that's a really important, fundamental aspect of the democratic process.
That is a very good point. That is a very important point about yesing. I would borrow that term from you, sir. Let me bring in Senator Sinclair. First of all, congratulations to you on being appointed as the Farmers and Fishermen's representative in the Senate. Kindly unmute your mic, sir. And I'm also going to bring in here Dr. Stephen Fletcher, because I know that Stephen Fletcher was engaged in some consultative work with the sector on reforming both the nutmeg and cocoa industries. Now, Senator Sinclair, I'm going to begin by asking you to respond to the 2021 budget. Does it meet your expectations?
I must say, morning to you, Kellen, for inviting myself as representing the farmers and fisher folks of Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Martinique. I want to also make a disclaimer to the point that this here I don't consider a debate on the budget. It's commentaries.
And
I
don't expect
will
you to,
take
correct.
place in the
Yes,
Parliament.
the debate will happen in the Senate. Yes.
Yeah, but
right.
I just want the public to understand that. So certain details and certain things that we want to go into, if you say, why you don't go into that? I won't at this stage,
Right.
and I have to respect my position and responsibility. At the same
Correct.
time, yes, at the same time, in terms of responding to, is not what I think, is what our farmers and fisher folks. And
Mhm.
if you realize, it's the same message that our farmers and fishers has been asking for over and over: more investment. We need to
Mhm.
see agriculture taking a better position, not coming maybe 20th or 21st, almost at the bottom of the ladder, but we
Mhm.
want to be at the top of the ladder. So, for example, when the Minister of Finance presented 18.6 million, and then later on he went into details of agriculture and then he says, it's 40 something million. I smile and I say, well, why couldn't we put everything together and say agriculture, you have 40 something million, so you get a better position in on the ladder? Because
Mhm.
positioning and the optics is all about making people feel there is hope. So if I'm middle of the ladder, you say, hey, this is what is due to agriculture, right? But maybe another department may manage it, another department might manage it. So we sort of give it more respect. So that, I think, is the first issue. And farmers always feel disrespected when they tend to be slighted. I think also the matter of some key items, though, was raised. The issue of pre-Delasini, the issue of the farm roads, the issue of revitalizing MNIB and create more markets. So there were some good things that were mentioned. But my concern still at the end of the day is not even about where do we find the money, because we understand the history of implementation and some of this is grant financing and all of those things. But I think is how do we use this money wisely to create more value for the farmer. So, for example, the farmers would say to you, Clino, that, for example, I was speaking to a farmer yesterday, and he's saying, look, we're doing all this the bushing by the road, but look at, we have so much vines on the cocoa trees and so much vines in our lands. If we clean it up, we can able to improve our food security. We're not saying that what is happening on the road is not important, but this is the sort of discussion that farmers are having. We look at the fisher folks. I hardly hear anything really in the budget about fisher folks. For example, in St. Mark's, for example, we don't have a jetty in St. Mark's. You have three fish markets there. So those things, and this is not things that I am saying. This is what the farmers are saying, the fisher folks are saying. We need to
Mhm.
see more in agro-processing, value added. We keep speaking about that. And all of those things is what is going to create sustainability. Because at the end of the day, when we say agriculture, we are concerned about feeding the nation, making sure that the nation has food to eat, that is food maybe for 5 months, 10 months down the road. Because in this COVIDious time in particular, what is our food security plan for that? How do we allocate $5 million and we say this would go specifically to ensure food security? Because backyard gardening, yes, is helpful, but it is really not a food security strategy to ensure that we have enough tania and dasheen and arrows and fish and so on stored away. But I think that sometimes we as technocrats, we are the farmers, we need to keep speaking and we need to keep helping, because a lot of times I believe, and as Brother Jerry said a while ago, communication is important, dialogue is important, because sometimes you have to walk in the shoes, walk in the man's shoes, and
Mhm.
understand how it feels. And I wait for any other comments you have on that, on my
Uh, uh,
introductory.
Dr. Fletcher, representing grouping of civil society, but I know that you also consulted on reforming some aspects of the agricultural sector. First, I'm going to talk to you, get you to respond to the budgetary outlook for agriculture in 2021, but also to get you to react to, from a civil society lens, to the 2021 budget.
Okay, Kelon, let me again thank you for having me here, and my other colleagues, and certainly your viewing and listening audience. Kelon, before I answer your question directly, permit me to really thank the public servants that are operating in very challenging environment and challenging times and have been able to put this budget together. Enough respect, as we'll say, go out to those persons who have labored in the vineyard for that purpose. So that is really, really critical, and I want to point that out. The other thing I want to say in terms of my general comments on the budget, some of it has been said already by other colleagues, is that we have to look at what is the theme of this budget. It's about recovery, transformation, and resilience. And ask ourselves to what extent the contents of the budget supports this. A budget speaks to where the revenue is going to come from and the expenditure and the distribution of that money. The narratives are useful in that it gives the political theme of the government of the day and so on, but most important are the numbers. So critically, and I don't want to repeat much of what other persons have said, we have some issues and challenges before us. We are still within the COVID period. We are not yet out of COVID. So let us understand this. And it really poses fundamental challenges for us. We understand from the experts that the persons who have succumbed most to COVID are persons that have pre-existing conditions. What does that mean for us? What does it mean for the world? It fundamentally means that we have to, and those pre-existing conditions has to do with lifestyle and dietary issues, what we eat, what we consume, issues of diabetes, issues of high blood pressure, and so forth. Has the budget really adequately addressed, therefore, the source of those high, which is the agricultural sector? Permit me to spend a minute on the agricultural sector.
But
this is very important.
Mr. Pressure, but you know, I would interrupt you there. There's also some personal responsibility that has to go into people's personal choices with respect to their dietary habits too.
Absolutely, and I'm coming to that. And one of those responsibilities, and I'm sure Senator St. Clair will agree this, is the extent to access to the right quality of food. We can get involved in backyard gardening, as you have indicated, and so on, but where is the bulk, large quantities coming from, and to what extent prices are not a deterrent to access of those high, good quality foods. So this is, I agree with you totally, but you also have to sit in that extent. But more importantly, to the agricultural sector, I agree with Roderick that the expenditures are in various pockets of ministries. But what fundamentally is important is the extent to which the minister and his ministry can execute programs specific to that sector, and understanding why it is dispensed all over in various ministries. So agriculture now is number 8 of the 10 key sectors that are receiving expenditure. The issues are that Senator Roderick raises important, yes, in various fields. But what does it say about the control that the ministry and the minister will have over the dispensation of effective programs? The other issue that has to be addressed is the issue of, that has been dealt with to some extent, the fact that the construction area seems to be representing the driver for economic development and growth. To some extent, it really represents the absence of a cohesive strategy in which there are interlinkages and you can see the development going forward. These projects, and people can look at the documents that are presented alongside the budget, and the appendix in particular, tables 1, tables 4, and table 6, which really speaks to issues of fiscal issues, debts, and resource mobilization. So in addition to the over 60% or so of the income, of the revenues rather, that is expected to come from the National Transformation Fund, the rest is really which means quite a lot of passports will have to be sold, right? Which also means that the rest of it is going to come from a reliance on external aid, external assistance. That is an issue that we have to look at. And how does that then affect the ordinary man, the ordinary household in this country that are struggling to survive? And finally, in terms of opening comments that I want to point to, is this very important fact that as the debt grows again, there's an opportunity cost that is associated with debt. And the opportunity cost is normally affects the workers and the poor class in society much more than other sectors. So we are hinging our growth, we are hinging our recovery from this period on expanded debt, right? And on assumptions that may not really hold true going forward, given what we are existing in today. And these are general comments, and we can drill into them deeper as we go forward.
So you talk about linkages, and I'm going to bring in Mr. Rappaport and have this discussion here, because one of the narratives that emerges from central government has to do with having stronger linkages between agriculture and tourism, right? The current Minister of Agriculture talks about ensuring that they can stop or stymie the importation of food to be used at the hotels. And perhaps, Mr. Rappaport, I believe you're also a farmer. So how can we bridge this gap, and how can we ensure that? And you, Mr. Sinclair, you can jump in on this as well. Ensure that that linkage between agriculture and tourism, with respect to not only supply chain management, but also with respect to ensuring that there is that sustainable linkage, can actually be robust and it can be sustainable. Mr. Rappaport, I will start with you.
Well, I think first of all, I mean, we have to address the issue that we're still dependent on importing food for our general population, and that has to be addressed as well. But in terms of linkages to tourism, I mean, there's so many linkages, potential linkages between agriculture and tourism. I mean, to begin with, and there's been some very promising things in the last few years. When Silver Sands came in, for instance, they started working with farmers directly, to grow things specifically to their needs. There's a need for more crop diversity. There's a need, I've said for years that it would be really a good thing for Grenada to try to develop a more diverse seed bank. Because one of the issues that I see in Grenada is, especially when it comes to growing vegetables, it's like when okra's in season, everybody's dumping okra on the market. All it's doing is driving down the price of okra, making it less profitable for farmers. And more crop diversity would go a long way towards strengthening the ability of a farmer to make some decent living. But the other linkages between tourism and agriculture, besides just providing food and cutting down on the importation of food, is also linkages from tours. There's a big movement. Experiential tourism is one of the biggest growth areas in tourism. And this speaks to, a broader issue that I'd like to touch on for a moment, if I may.
Yeah.
Which is, what direction are we going in terms of developing tourism, as well as what direction are we going in developing agriculture? Personally, I don't feel that these two huge Chinese mega projects are sustainable and are the kinds of direction in tourism that we should be going in Grenada. I mean, one of the things that has made us a destination and that has had growth is the uniqueness of what we are offering as a tourism product. We're not offering, we still have, we're still an economy that has a large agricultural presence. We haven't been overdeveloped by tourism in a way that it just looks like a concrete jungle. And I think we as a nation have to make a decision. What direction are we going in tourism? Are we trying to become like every other Caribbean island in terms of, are we trying to become Barbados? And just get overdeveloped, or are we going to, embrace what makes us different and what drives a lot of people to come to Grenada to begin with, which I also believe in the long run will make it much more, it's true sustainable development that will allow our people to also enjoy our natural attributes and not end up in a situation where tourism is developed to the point where it's just overwhelming. And I think that this is something that really needs to be looked at and addressed, because
Mr. Rappaport, is that a concern that you articulated with the government of Grenada? Because their counter argument would be, again, they frame this debate around the need for room stock, right? And the demand from airlines that they cannot fill enough seats to come to Grenada. How do you respond to that narrative that comes from the government?
The way I respond to it is I would recommend that anybody that can get their hands on a book that was published a few years ago called Overbooked, that was written by the New York Times travel editor, that touched on a lot of these issues and the overdevelopment of tourism in many places in the world and its negative impact that it's had. Now, look, I know it's a balance here because we're trying to create jobs. We need to create jobs in Grenada, and I understand that. And I'm not, I mean, I represent the tourism sector. I'm not saying that we should not develop tourism by any means, but I just think that you have to look at what your product is, and what makes somebody, for instance, in North America, willing dollars for a ticket to come to Grenada versus going to Jamaica, Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, and the Northern Caribbean island. What is it that we are offering that's going to be different, that's going to motivate somebody to come down here? Okay. And what concerns me is that I sit with too many meetings and with developers and whatnot who go at length about how they love Grenada and how wonderful an island we are and how beautiful it is and how lovely our people are. And then they want to come in and build a project that is out of scale with what our nation is. I mean, you can barely drive down through Grand Anse Valley today. Okay. What's going to happen when you put 2,000 rooms in Mount Hartman? This is the issues that are relevant. We've always, emphasized the natural attributes of Grenada. I remember when I first came to Grenada over 20 years ago, that was back in the days of nothing is built taller than a coconut tree. Now we've got a project on the table up at Levera with two 15-story towers. So my question is, is that who we are?
Well, I trust that you will be telegraphing this to the powers that be as well, because that is a conversation that the Grenadian people need to have, and they have to decide what their development approach has to be. But Senator, let me get Stephen, and I'll get to Dr. Fletcher, and then I'll get to Senator Sinclair.
Yeah, if I may just quickly add to the issue of the convergence and the linkages that I talked about. Certainly tourism is one of those. But let us look at this. We have seen over the years, the trajectory has been government's inability to implement major projects and programs as enunciated in successive governments. There's an implementation deficit ranging anywhere between 30 to 45, 50% every year. We are now saying that we are going to invest significantly in capital projects. Infrastructure will lead the recovery of the economy and its sustainability. But yet we hope to save over $11 million by not building the capacity within the ministries for implementation of those very projects, right? So we are not filling positions. And there are critical ministries where there is a deficit of talent. There's a deficit of capacity and capabilities. So how are we going to be expected to ramp up to 305 million or so in capital expenditure or whatever, when in fact we do not have the capacity, and it does not appear so we're going to be building that capacity for implementation. It is this kind of dysfunctionality that I'm talking about, to ensure that we can implement and have a robust economy going, and that the people of this country can improve the quality of their lives and live a happier, sustainable, and healthy life.
Senator Sinclair?
Thank you very much, Kellan, for chiming in. I'm very encouraged by the statements of Mr. Rapporteur. I know of his name. I would like to be in touch with him after the program. I would say that his mind is in the right place in terms of the facilitation and coordination to work with the farming and fisher folks community. Myself, based on my training, as I mentioned from time to time, I'm well placed to coordinate and to work along with the association to create that opportunity. Yes, he mentioned the issue of the Silver Sun and so on. I see those as piecemeal in the context of the amount of hotel rooms that we have, the potential for feeding these tourists that will be coming into this country, and the fact that we do have a truly operational hotel and tourism association. Of course, I would have made statements to the effect in terms of that linkage, and it's more than just the food part, of course, and I share that same connection. But in terms of the food part, Mr. Rapporteur we need to speak. And of course, I guess maybe in the next month or two, we can maybe come back onto Kellan's program and advance some of the things that we have achieved. I don't think we necessarily need government per se in this dialogue to start with, but I think government will have a role to provide the various enabling environments that would be required so as to ensure that our farmers can feed. Farmers and fisher folks can deliver. They have delivered and they will continue to deliver. But the key thing with anything else, and you know that as any businessman, is I need to have the market. And of course, once there is a guaranteed market, then you can walk towards something. And you don't put your targets high in the sky, but you put them just in front where you can reach. The Japanese has a philosophy of Kaizen, where you do small improvements. I say you kick the ball just where you can see the ball. You kick the ball too far, and somebody else want to kick the ball away. So in that regards, my response to this, Brother Rapatio, I'm prepared to have a dialogue with you and we can share numbers. Kellan has our contacts and I'm prepared to see what we can do to do something for our farmers and fisher folks, even in now of this COVID time. So we can have a plan. Because what happens sometimes, Kellan, is that you see there is a trick in trade, that we know the X amount of persons going to come into the country, and we know that we would need food for them. And then we wait like on the last minute as if a cabbage and a tomato and an orange bears like overnight. And we say, oh, the farmers can deliver. But then on the same breath, we come in another time of the year and say, oh, there is so much. So the farmers choose to produce a lot when they choose to and produce a little bit. The fact is that once you can show, it's like Kirani James. If he has run 45 seconds in a 400 meters, we know he has that capacity and he can do that. So we know if we're going to benchmark him, we know he can get there. The fact that we can do 10,000 or 40,000 pounds of something, it means that we have the capacity. Now, how do we arrange it and how do we schedule it? So this is something that I'm prepared to work with the Tourism Association on, and I know we can have great success.
All right, folks, we will come up for air. This has been a very robust discussion so far. I want the first panel to stay with us. When I come back, we will have a wrap-up, and then we will turn to the Leader of the Opposition, the Honorable Tobias Clement, as well as Senator Ron Redhead. Folks, thank you for being so patient. Stay with us. We'll be right back. And welcome back, folks. But before I get to wrap up the first segment, I just want to get to some of the comments that have been coming in on Facebook here. Sam Jim says, stop leaving farming for school dropouts and integrate it into our curriculum. We learn how plants grow, but we can't grow plants. It's absurd. A properly crafted education plan could go a long way in bridging that gap. And Sam, you make a very profound point. Agriculture has always been viewed as a point of shame. In at least when I was growing up in Grenada, I do not know if there's been a cultural shift in that regard, but I am proud to say that agriculture sent me to school, and I would not be here had it not been for all of the nutmegs that I picked up in Pomerose and in Crochet with my grandparents and my great grandparents. So, due respect to the agricultural sector. Bob Marisho, in responding to Sam, says, Sam, you're making sense 99% of the time in this program. I just love your pragmatism. I'm not saying as much as just about everyone already said, but I would like to have said on the budget. My advice to the government is that you cannot borrow yourself out of this crisis. They need innovation. Then Sam goes on to say, too much planning in isolation. When you raise points, it comes across as being against progress. We need to iron out the kinks before committing. The citizens are left to deal with the negative impacts of certain types of developments, and the government just says we should be thankful and positive. It does not work that way. Sam, I would actually like to invite you to co-host the program. You're making some very salient points here this morning. And then Cassandra says, I'd love to hear more from Ms. Bain and Dr. Fletcher. Brilliant, brilliant minds. All right, so let us get back to the panel, to that first segment panel. I'm going to give you guys an opportunity to wrap up. Looking forward to 2021 and the expectations for what would occur in 2021 in Grenada. I'm going to start with Mr. Rappaport.
Okay. Boy, I wish I had a crystal ball.
Yes.
What's going to happen in 2021? Well, I'm an optimist by nature, and my hope and what I'm praying for is that there is a positive trend in terms of dealing with the pandemic, and we slowly start to head back towards that we knew before the pandemic. I think it's going to be a rough, rocky road for a little bit of time because, as is quite often the case, what happens in the rest of the world we have very little control over, and it's going to impact us in a big way. But I know that the people in my sector are very committed towards getting back on their feet and going forward, and will rise to the challenges just like we rose to the challenges in the past after Hurricane Ivan and after the economic downturn in 2008. I personally feel like times like this are an opportunity for one to take stock, both as a business, in a business context, and a personal context, and try to make the most of the situation and go forward in a positive way. And I'm optimistic. I think that, we have a great product to offer in the tourism world. We have a lot of wonderful properties in Grenada, and the press has been really positive over the last few years, if not longer. And I think we just have to continue heading in that direction. And I think we have to continue to push for the continued linkages with agriculture, because, I think it's one of those things that people too often, I hear in Grenada, it's like an either or situation. Either the government should be behind agriculture or they should be behind tourism, and it's got to be at the expense of one or the the
you're suggesting that there is no nuance there in the
and as you mentioned, I sit in both worlds. I'm a farmer. I do spices and flowers is what I mostly farm. All right. And I also was involved with La Sagesse Nature Center for over 20 years. My wife was one of the co-founders of La Sagesse. And I'm still involved in the tourism sector. I'm getting my garden ready to open it up to the public. So, it's they have to work together. The health of each sector is dependent on the other one, and the health of our nation is dependent on both of them being developed equally as two strong pillars. I think if we put all of our eggs in either just one of those baskets, it's a mistake, as has been witnessed by what happened in this past 6 months or so. You need to have a diverse economy, and our obvious and most logical way to have a diverse economy is to emphasize the development of both tourism and agricultural sector.
All right. Let us get to Dr. Fletcher. Dr. Fletcher, we cannot hear you, sir. You need to unmute your technology.
Yes, I was in such haste to wish you all the best for the season, because this might be our last program for the year, so I forgot to unmute. Having said that, however, Kelon, in wrapping up, let me say this, that I wish that the contents of the budget was more in line with the theme of the budget, where we could have really seen the recovery process, and in a very comprehensive way, and in a very strategic and visionary way, that the people of Grenada could have feel comfortable that we are going to recover. The focus seems to continue to be largely on the tourism sector, missing the fundamental point that has been made throughout, and the underlying theme here in the last half an hour or so is that critical linkage between agriculture and tourism. But more importantly than that, we have to diversify our economy and go beyond this and provide a significant role for the private sector. I don't think I have seen and heard sufficient of how the private sector and the public sector intend to really partner to get the country going. It is not business as usual. We are behaving to some degree as though it's a continuum and that there has been no fundamental break in the way things have been done. There has been, and we must recognize that and reflect that in our planning. The other thing is the issue of borrowing ourselves out of the current situation, increasing the debt burden, increasing the opportunity costs for better health care, for better quality of life for people, and paying a significant amount of debts going forward. We need to strike a cohesive balance between those. We need to focus on the patriotism of our people. We need to focus on some nationalism and national pride. And I have no doubt that our people in these challenging times can rise to the challenge and get involved in innovative solutions to solve some of the problems that is going to be with us for a very, very long time to come. COVID has presented additional challenges, Kelon, but it is not the challenge alone. We are faced with fundamental challenges of rising unemployment, rising youth unemployment, issues to do with the fisher folk, the agricultural sector. The infrastructure is falling apart, literally, throughout. So we need to have a comprehensive, significant plan for the development of our country that must be inward looking to a large extent, to call on the reserves of our people, our energy, our patriotism, our national pride, and combining that with whatever assistance we can get from the outside, not forgetting our Grenadian people who are out there like yourself in the diaspora, who has a significant amount of talent to bring to bear and solving the problems that this country has been confronting over the years. We can overcome the challenges that we are faced with, but we must put our money where the mouth is, where our mouths are. And in that regard, we can readjust. It's too late, Kelon, but we can readjust the allocation of the expenditure to better reflect that inward development that we are looking for and that we hope to get. So health, for example, agriculture, infrastructure, really are the top three, in my view, that we should focus on in 2021 going forward. And I trust that the new Minister of Agriculture, and finally, Kelon, let me put this here. The new Minister of Agriculture seemed to have given the nutmeg and cocoa farmers some breathing space. At least I'm not hearing much about this merger and privatization also of the nutmeg and cocoa industry. And I think that is welcome news. It's going to build on what Senator Roderick has pointed out earlier on, the confidence of the farmers to get into production, expand upon it, build upon it for the good of Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Martinique. Thank you very much for having me.
All right. Laurel.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. And I will build from what Dr. Stephen has said. In terms of 2021, I see it as a challenging year. But I believe that with challenges, there are opportunities. And I will put the opportunities in three sections. First of all, opportunities to relook the economy. We need to balance our outward-looking policies, particularly our dependence on tourism, with our domestic policies that will sustain us during these periods of disasters. We need to balance it. There is a heavy reliance on tourism, and there is opportunity to look for various aspects of the economy where we can invest. I also thought that in that area, the pandemic has shown that we could do things virtually, and therefore we could look at our professional services and what could be done there. There is a strategy, and it should be an integrated economy. I heard no reference to how the budget built towards achieving the National Sustainable Development Plan. This may need to be relooked, but we need to build as we go forward. COVID-19.
Go ahead.
COVID-19 has shown up some social issues, and the social sectors must be given equal attention. Our education sector, how does it support what we want to do economically? What has COVID-19 done to our education sector? Health, what has it done to our health sector? What do we need? What we're going forward with the economy? What do we do with our health sector? Other social ills as we grow. Unemployment, not only unemployment, the working poor. We have to create high quality jobs. All these must be taken in consideration as we build an integrated economy. And the last point I will make, because others have to come in, is the issue of the debt. The debt has to be carefully managed. The debt, in terms of contracting debt, should be done carefully. I will refer to our Debt Management Act, which gives us stipulation in terms of managing that debt. It is extremely important because as the debt grows, it constrains our ability to grow and develop. And I will say, let us, as we go forward, focus together the economic sectors, the social sectors, pull them together. Let's grow the economy. Let's transform the economy to have sustainable growth in the future. Some of the issues that arise in terms of the implementation of the capital program are well documented in a report we did when we did the 2020 budget, because some of them repeat themselves. But let us pull hands together, use the opportunity to transform the economy.
All right, and I'm going to bring in the two senators representing two sectors in the Senate. Obviously, I do not expect you to telegraph what you will be talking about in your budget debates. That we'll have to wait for, and I suspect that you are still in the throes of preparing for that. So I will begin with you, Senator Lewis, looking forward to 2021, especially for the working people of Grenada.
Well, once again, thank you. And this has been a very useful discussion as usual. But I've consistently said Grenada does not suffer from a lack of ideas. I want to repeat, Grenada does not suffer from a lack of ideas. What we suffer from is that lack of implementation. Yes? And therefore, in this context, we recognize and accept that 2021 will be very challenging.
Mm-hmm.
The workers, we are absolutely confident, as has been demonstrated over the years, be it Hurricane Ivan, be it the structural adjustment program, we are always prepared to carry our share and more than our share of the sacrifices. The workers in the IRD department must be complemented and complemented for the services that they did in terms of collecting the revenues. It is important, therefore, to focus a lot on the healthcare services. And important to that is the aspect of the tenure of employment of our nurses and our doctors and our people in the health services. You can't have people working for 10 and 15 years or 20 years, and you are telling them that they do not have tenure of service, which is a clear violation of our Employment Act, Section 29.5. The aspect of patriotism that Dr. Fletcher addressed is extremely important, and the peace of mind is important. We must demonstrate in a practical and meaningful way to our workers that as employers and leaders of the country, we are serious about their well-being. And it is not just a matter of handing out. It should not have taken us all these years to recognize that we have to create a new Imani program. It should not have taken us all of these years. It is not just a matter of just creating and saying that we have work, but it's a matter of having more meaningful and sustainable jobs. I would also like to see the resources in the Ministry of Labor be significantly improved. We must agree that in this period of COVID-19 in particular, quite a number of employers, they are very good employers, let me say SGU and all those places, they're a number of good employers. A number of people, employers, are using COVID-19 as an excuse to try to deny workers some of their basic rights. It therefore means that the workplaces that are not unionized will be heavily dependent on the Ministry of Labor for its intervention to resolve industrial issues. Also, from the unionized workplaces, we will be calling more on the Ministry of Labor, and the timely intervention of the Ministry of Labor can avert industrial unrest. Despite the fact that we have challenges, we cannot and ought not to give up our rights. And therefore, it is important in that direction to pay attention to doing this. The aspect, as I said, of health, the tenure of employment for our workers, the aspect of hope is not just a means of talking. I am sure that if the economists do a review, you will also find that in a period of much needed recovery, we have been able to get more internally in terms of internal resources, internal financing, in terms of a percentage basis than external sources. And the government has played a significant role. What we have always lacked is the prudent management of those resources, the prudent application of those resources. It is not just about setting ourselves up to win an election. It is not just about setting ourselves up to win an election, but it is about doing things that will allow people to see a shift in the quality of life and the standard of living. So it is not just unemployment, but it's underemployment. And we look forward as a working class and the labor movement to continue our sacrifices, but to ensure that these sacrifices are spread across the economy and to give what is due within the context of all the different developments.
Senator Sinclair?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Kalan. Well, I want to firstly state that from a national perspective, we need to recognize the effort of not only the frontline workers and all of those words, but all of us as nationals in our whole fight against the COVID. This is a national issue. It affects each and every one of us, from our farmers, our businesses, and our whole economy. So we need to continue to be safe. We ask the government that they need to keep on tough with the regulations. At the same time, we need to ensure that it's done in such a manner that the future will still be bright. So it's not restricting. I'm also calling on us as a nation that we need to continue to be our own market. We need to be able to consume and use our local products from our farms, from our farmers, from our fisher folks. With any strong export market, you need to have a strong domestic market. So we must be prepared. And that preparation must start now. The preparation must also start in that it gives us a more healthy and stronger body when we eat our own local products. For example, in Belize, I was seeing that the Minister of Agriculture was saying we need to ensure that we satisfy locally first before we look at even bringing in. So those are those sort of strong positions we need to take if you want to be resilient and strong. I also want to say into 2021, we must be hopeful. Grenada is one of many countries in the world, and I heard the Minister of Health, I think, was saying, and we all have to be proud of the high ratings we get as being this low in COVID free and all of these things. It's very good for us. So what we need to understand because of that, we can have quick potential for opportunities in international markets, both in terms of access for our products and also access that persons want to come to a safe place. So we have to balance that act as we move forward and use it to leverage our whole economic opportunities. We want to see our big items, our nutmeg, our cocoa, our fish, our soursop. Okay, these are big ticket items for Grenada in terms of exports. We need to focus and do better in those areas, both in terms of the value added, both in terms of using it locally, and both in terms of exporting it.
All right.
At the same,
yes, yes, and we have to get to the break.
okay,
But
okay.
yeah,
So I will stop here because,
yeah.
of course, as I say, this is not my rebuttal, of course, and there'll be many other opportunities. But I will say, farmers and fisher folks, stay strong. We need to be united, and of course, as we said back then, people united could never be defeated.
Well, you bring up rebuttal, and of course we'll be getting to the leader of the opposition
Yeah.
shortly about rebuttals, because based on what happened in Parliament last week, Friday, I do not know that we currently have a budget debate. Of course, we are going to unpack that with Honorable Tobias Clement and former Senator Ron Redhead of the NDC to get their response to the budget. But I'm going to take this break, and I'm actually going to play a clip from Dr. Keith Mitchell when he was the leader of the opposition back in 2012. To my civil society panel, I want to thank you guys for a wonderful discussion and have a wonderful Sunday. Folks, we'll be right back with Honorable Clement and Mr. Redhead. Stand by.
The Speaker, contrary to what is being preached, this government has quickly become vengeful, resentful, dismissive, even treating the parliamentary opposition with scorn. For example, Mr. Speaker, we note, as I pointed out before, the deliberate attempt to stifle political debate in this House by action state. Obviously, Mr. Speaker, this practice can only handicap the opposition and curtail meaningful debate. It is therefore an assault on our parliamentary system. In this same vein, Mr. Speaker, there are the unrelenting personal attacks on the leader and members of the parliamentary opposition, the intimidation of political opponents, and the general use of the tactics of intimidation against all those, including public servants and police officers, who stand up to the unethical behavior of certain persons in office. Mr. Speaker, this pattern of behavior is inconsistent with the good democratic principles here. This government, since its government took office, the parliamentary opposition, in a spirit of partnership, has been given advice and warnings about the impact of certain government policies and actions. We have consistently advised that government and opposition should agree on some major policy decisions on matters which are critical to the country's future. We have been consistently ignored. We warn that allowing a few privileged yes men and women to run amok with the country's resources, threatening political opponents and even members of their own government, and acting with impunity while living the best lives they ever had, will hurt the image of this country. We warn them it would lead to the demise of the own government.
Okay, folks, that was former Prime Minister, former leader of the opposition. He's not the former Prime Minister. I will get in trouble for that faux pas there. He is the current Prime Minister, former leader of the opposition. This was back in 2012 when the current Prime Minister was the leader of the opposition, expressing aversion to the conduct of governance of the previous National Democratic Congress government. It's interesting how those narratives seem to be recycled during every political cycle in Grenada's history. But I want to welcome the political panel now. I have former Senator Ron Redhead of the National Democratic Congress, as well as the leader of the opposition and the Member of Parliament for St. George Northeast, Honorable Tobias Clement. Good morning, sir.
Good morning
Good
and
afternoon. It's morning here. It's afternoon where you are.
It's afternoon in Grenada. So good
Yes.
afternoon and thank you for having me.
Now, Mr. Clement, let's get it off the bat. Would it be fair to say that you abdicated your responsibility by not showing up in Parliament on Friday? Your constituents, I'm asking a question on behalf of the Grenadian people. You are the leader of the opposition in the Parliament, and Grenadians expected that the leader of the opposition would have been responding to the budget so that the budget debate can begin. Mr. Clement, how do you respond to that concern?
Before you go on to what happened on Friday, I hope that you had also a view of what happened on Wednesday.
I also had a view of what happened on Wednesday, Mr. Clement. I saw that exchange. I did see that exchange.
To be clear, what I had asked for and still asking for is the same courtesies to be granted to the leader of the opposition as was granted for the last almost 50 years. In the past, Mr. Bubb, as you would know, every budget presentation that was done in Grenada before last week was done on a Friday.
Mm-hmm.
The leader of Her Majesty's opposition they were always given 2 days, including the Prime Minister now when he was leader of the opposition on several occasions. So the budget is presented on a Friday. You have Saturday and Sunday to prepare. Lo and behold, I went into the Finance Committee meeting 2 weeks ago, and the budget was set for the 2nd of December, and the debate was scheduled to continue on the 3rd and on the 4th and so forth. But when I saw that, I had objections, and I requested of the leader of government business that the same courtesies be granted, that I be given 2 days. So that is when I said, either you have it on the 27th or on the 4th. But I would like to be granted the same courtesies that was established for the life of our country.
But Mr. Clement, your former boss, the current Prime Minister, Dr. Mitchell, actually made the same complaint in 2012.
This is what I'm talking about.
Let me clarify what I'm talking about, sir.
Yeah.
The complaint that he made was that he did not receive the estimates of revenue and expenditure in time to be able to form a proper analysis of in order to be able to rebut the budget. Okay, it seems as though that timing issue with respect to that Finance Committee meeting appears to be the issue here, because the leader of government's business said that you did receive the estimates of revenue and expenditure in time. And so the narrative should not be about the actual presentation. What say you?
It has to be. It has to be, because you see, we cannot split hairs here. There are many things to consider. When he spoke to that issue in 2012, the standing order says that you have to be given the document 7 days before Parliament sits.
Mm-hmm.
All documents are given. But over the last couple of years, we have changed how it is done. So now, Mr. Bubb, the document was sent to me, and it was sent electronically.
Mm-hmm.
The budget document is 635 pages. And then we have some attachments that would bring it up to about 1,000 and something pages. And I complained and I requested that I needed to get a printed copy of the budget document so you could sit and peruse and highlight and underline. But how many of us that could sit? And I mean, I am complaining, but I know there are a lot of my colleagues that if they have to study the budget in its entirety, maybe they might just have to study the ministry for which they are put in charge of. But in my position, I would have to study the entire budget. And to sit on the computer to study a 600-page or 1,000-page document, I can tell you that is not the easiest thing in the world. It's not.
Mr. Clement, it's not the easiest thing in the world. Again,
it's very difficult. But what I am saying, I asked the leader of government business through the parliament to give me the same courtesies that was granted to all opposition leaders in the past, that they were given 2 days. But you would see on Wednesday, I stood at the adjournment and asked the speaker for that time. And in his deliberation, he said there was nothing that said that I had to go to be the first or the time when I have to present. So
except Mr. Clement, the speaker was expecting you to show up on Friday.
No, he did not say that. Well, he did not say that. He said,
so. I'm sorry to do this on Friday.
When did he say that? On Friday?
On Friday. Well, you were not
Wednesday.
To hear what he said, because that's
on Wednesday, he made his judgment on Wednesday. And on Wednesday, the speaker's judgment cannot change. When the speaker makes a judgment, he cannot. But what he said on Wednesday, Mr. Bob, was it different from what he said on Friday?
I mean, you would have to check the Hansard. I'm just reporting what he said.
Now, you have recorded?
Now, Mr. Clement, you're saying that the speaker's word is unimpeachable, correct? Now, according to what transpired in Parliament on Friday, there is the expectation that we no longer have a budget debate, right? Because in essence, well, I'm telling you what transpired on Friday, since apparently you were not in Parliament on Friday. The Prime Minister stood up and asked the Speaker whether or not Dr. Clarice Modeste Cohen, the MP for St. Mark, who was the first speaker on Friday, right, whether or not she was actually responding to the debate on the budget or whether she was giving a presentation. Now, according to what transpired, it would appear that you would only be given an hour to present on Monday when you show up in Parliament. So my question to you is, how do you overrule the speaker's deliberation when the speaker would say to you on Monday that you are only expected to present for 1 hour?
Mr. Bob, what I would say to you, well, then what we will all have to do is to come to Parliament on Monday. Because you said the Prime Minister stood up. The Prime Minister is not the Speaker of the House. He doesn't direct the action of the House.
He certainly can stand up on a point of order.
What directs the action of the House is the Constitution and the standing orders. The Speaker cannot change the standing orders. That would be unlawful, because the standing orders, which you have a copy of, I hope you do.
I do have a copy of the standing orders.
The standing orders is clear on budget debate. The leader of the opposition or any member of the opposition designated by the leader of the opposition in replying to the Minister of Finance may speak as long as the Minister of Finance spoke under paragraph 1 of this paragraph, or for 2 hours, whichever is greater. So in the budget presentation, if the Minister of Finance spoke for 3.5 hours, I will have 3.5 hours to present. If the Minister of Finance spoke for half an hour, I will have 2 hours to present. I would expect on Monday, despite what all was said, that I will get my 2 hours. And if I ask for extended time, 15 minutes, so be it. That is what is there. That is what is there. And it did not say the standing orders never say the time. What the standing order says, that the leader of Her Majesty's opposition will have equal time to respond to the budget.
No,
And
okay.
and this is what I will do.
All right. Now, Mr. Clement, and I'm going to get to Mr. Red. I do not expect you to telegraph what your rebuttal is going to be to the budget, but if you can, just give us a general sense of what direction you will be taking your debate in on Monday.
Well, the truth about it, we're looking at the budget, and I have looked at the budget and studied the budget well. And the 2020 budget, and you go back to the 2019, 2018, 2017, there is nothing so much different there, you know. It is as business as usual. And the times that we are living in is not business as usual. And I do believe that there should be an alternative budget, because what I'm seeing there, when you get real down to it and you unfold it, oh my goodness, Monday, Monday, Monday.
Monday, and I see.
Monday.
All right, that should be a status update here. Senator Redhead, former Senator Redhead, let me bring you in. How is your party responding to the estimates of revenue and expenditure for 2021?
Right. Well, first off, good afternoon, Kelon, and good afternoon to your panel.
Good afternoon.
Leader. All right, Mr. Clement. The National Democratic Congress has been looking at the budget similarly to what Mr. Clement is saying, and making it clear that we believe that this budget is inadequate for the times that we will be going into 21, and it does not seek to invest sufficiently in the productive sectors and to help bolster our resilient capacity to prevent future external shocks that may come from doing the same that we just experienced with the pandemic. We are looking at it. We will put out an official statement next week, God's will, and it's really, as Mr. Clement mentioned, it requires an alternative to what is going on. Because let me tell you, putting forward a business as usual budget in this context, I suspect that the government should be doing a lot of contingency planning to help prevent a situation as what we experienced in 2020 from reoccurring. I don't tend to see that. I am not confident that the two-pillar type economy is going to help build our resilience and grow, and we'll get the 6% growth. You heard the economists this morning on your panel mention about the unrealistic nature of those targets, and we in the National Democratic Congress continue to look at that.
Mr. Redhead, outside of critiquing the nature of the budget, what other alternative, what other options would your party be offering?
Right. Well, in the area of youth, for example, take for example, the government seeks to spend $7 million on a transition program. I have never heard of that before. I don't know to what extent that will help build the youth in the country in terms of capacity. Has it looked at any particular area that they will be transitioning to? We don't seem to understand what that is about. So in the area of youth, let me just say, you can't build the youth around programs from the government level. Government has a role to play, which is to help create the environment for youth development. And I would like to see the Ministry of Labor, I would like to see the Trades Union Council, and I would like to see the National Training Agency playing a greater role in facilitating programs of that nature, and the government should focus on creating the fiscal environment for youth to develop and thrive. So in terms of alternatives, we need new and creative ideas to help bring the thing forward through the pandemic.
Such as, can you cite some examples? You're speaking in general terms, but what are the specific examples?
Right. Well, I just mentioned, you cannot build the youth, for example, on just programs. You need the structure. So the training program should not be under the Ministry of Youth. They do not have the technical capacity to drive development and make it sector-based. Therefore, you need to give it to the people with the competence. It is unfair to the young people who are unskilled and unemployed to be asked to come through a government program, which is largely political, and ask them to develop out of that. An alternative, again, would mean that we need to audit the money program. We need to know exactly what the program has achieved, the level of achievement, and is it at all feasible? Because so far, about $200+ million from 2013 to now has been spent on that program. That's a lot of money for a, in a sense, non-productive program, and it's becoming more and more of a transfer payment. And in a period of the pandemic, you need to bolster your productive capacity and invest in that regard.
Now, Mr. Renard, you said that your party would be releasing a statement on the budget. Now, two questions. Does your party have a shadow cabinet? For example, do you have a shadow minister of finance who would be able to articulate and properly respond to the budget? And two, outside of just releasing a statement, what are your other plans with respect to having any kind of public education outreach programs with respect to the budget? That has been one of the complaints of the public, that your party has not been visible, especially in these times, especially from the prime minister, who complained that he's not seeing the opposition.
Well, look, just to make a segue, I do not expect our opponent to praise us, whether we do good or bad. But the point is taken. I see it in this context. For example, I like the fact that you asked the second question. What are we going to do in relation to consultation? So let me give you an example. Some of the work that myself and Senator James at the time started in the parliament when we were there was around preparing a national youth council, youth and student council. We firmly believe, Kelon, that if the environment for youth development is a bit more independent in nature and structure, it will help to foster some of these organizations to do some of what the government is spending large amounts of money to do right now, and they can then direct it into the productive sectors. We have looked at the African model of a youth council. We have looked at 2 Caribbean countries of a youth council. And I have spoken personally to about 3 government officials during my term in the Senate in terms of preparation for that. Of course, things changed in May 2020. But that's one area, and we will begin that process. The next area is the question of the freedom of information. We cannot develop a country where information is in a sense held back and we are only being told things in drips. If you want full participation, if you want full involvement, you have to tell people the truth. So we, for example, have drafted, and I have personally worked upon a draft that was done in 2007 in the area of freedom of information, and the party is also looking at that to talk about that in the future, 2021, and how that will help influence and shape government policies by including people with information. The first question was related to the shadow cabinet. Now, I will put it this way. We have in total 10 spokesmen and women from the party for different sectors. Yes, we do have a spokesman for the economy, and that is in the capacity of Mr. Lennox Andrews, economist, well-known economist. In relation to health, Mr. Kennedy Roberts is a spokesman. In relation to agriculture, our interim political leader, Adrian Persuader Thomas, is the spokesman for agriculture. The legal area, Sister Claudette Joseph, and the list goes on. You have social, you have other areas. So we do have that.
Okay, so my question again, outside of releasing a statement, what other activities, what other public activities would your party be embarking on to educate the people on the implications of the 2021 budget?
Right. So I just spoke of the National Youth Council. I didn't, maybe you didn't catch that.
Well, no. I'm going to. Oh, okay, so you're talking about the Youth Council, which is a proposal. But in this moment,
we'll bring it
in this moment. But as a student of history, I do remember when Dr. Francis Alexis was involved in the politics in Grenada, he held a People's Parliament activity, right? In which he went around the country and had a People's Parliament, sessions with the Grenadian people. That is what I was thinking about.
Right. Well, I cannot predict the future. I think the restrictions on gathering will hinder our ability to go out, per se, COVID. So we will be looking and working with the information that we get from the Ministry of Health and of course taking into consideration what is the standard and practice that we should adopt to help go forward. As you know, we could not hold our convention this year due to that fact in terms of the large gathering. So I would say we will utilize the technology to help bring that to the public, and that has always been done. We have concluded at least 4 of this public engagement, particularly with our young people, trying to get from my demographic a sense of where we are at in the pandemic and how can we come out, or what opportunities that we see as a demographic in terms of coming out of the pandemic. So that has been done and will continue.
Senator Redhead, thank you. Honorable Clement, I'm going to give you the opportunity to wrap up here as we conclude the program today. But looking forward to 2021, your role in the parliament as leader of the opposition, as well as expectations with respect to your future political career. Are you going to be contesting the next elections? What does that look like, sir? And you need to unmute your mic. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Bob. And let me say again hello to Mr. Redhead, and thank you for having me today. In terms of expectation, Mr. Bob, you know, a few years ago, the political leader, Prime Minister, then said to me, he made a statement to me which I took at heart. He said, "You are the keeper of the flame of our democracy. You are the
personally, Mr. Clement.
Pardon?
That's you personally, Tobias Clement.
He said it in Queen's Park, the first time when we went into government in 2013.
How times have changed, sir.
How times have changed. But I do believe, as a leader of Her Majesty's opposition, and I have a voice, a critical voice here in Grenada, I would have to be the keeper of the flame of our democracy and stand up for our democratic rights, our institutions, and our principles. Because if I sit back and let those democratic rights, those institutions be eroded, then it means, therefore, whosoever comes after will be at a disadvantage. Because it's only when those rights and those institutions are eroded, then what we have a creeping dictatorship. And when this occur, any other political entity or party will be at a huge disadvantage. And so my role is to speak out and to speak the truth to power as I see it in terms of our democracy and our democratic principles. Very important. I mean, yes, we could talk all principles and so forth, but if the powers that be have absolute power, then we are going absolutely nowhere with all the fights that we have. So I do have a fight on my hand. And the good thing about it, it may seem now to be 14 against 1 in the parliament. But I think with you, Mr. Bob, the Grenadian people, and what we have to realize, and what the whole of government have to realize is that it is not business as usual. Look at what you did this morning. You took the clip from 2012 and you played it.
That is what journalists are supposed to do. I was just doing my job.
Not only journalists would supposed to do it, but if you have the technology now, everyone can do it too. So it is not the days when you say something on the radio or in Parliament in Grenada and it just stays there. What I'm doing here now today with you is going island-wide in Grenada. It has gone universal. And as long as we have that platform, democracy would be alive. It just takes one person to stand up. And I would say to you, Mr. Bob, in your role, you have to stand up. To Mr. Redhead in his role, he has to stand up. To me, I have no choice but to stand up and fight for what we believe in. And for me, I am a lover of democracy. I am a lover of the institutions that governs democracy. I'm a lover of the institutions where we have checks and balances. And this is what I would fight for to the last drop of strength in my body.
All right, Mr. Clement, thank you so much. I know it's late.
It seems like we have a fight on our hands for Monday.
Not our hands, your hands, sir. I'm not a politician. You are the politician. Okay?
I am not alone.
Mr. Redhead, let's hear from you. Final thoughts?
Yes, Kelon. Final thoughts. I am looking forward to see how this budget will realize the 6% growth. I am looking forward to see how the budget will implement its very ambitious capital expenditure, $305 million. It's the first time in the history of the country, according to some economists, that we have presented so much or allocated so much. So I am looking forward to see if this will be achievable. I believe it is unrealistic. And from the National Democratic Congress's standpoint, we are not going to just critique areas of weaknesses, but we are going to be bringing forward greater ideas into the process. But I think the opposition leader's point is very important. We can do all these things, we can say all these things, we can have our consultations left, right, and center. But unless we do not talk out against injustice at the level of Parliament, one of the most important institutions for a democracy, we are going nowhere. And I believe that presently, the government has absolute control of the Parliament and is doing all what they can to help limit, stifle, and interfere in any way and suppress dissent in terms of how things are being run in the country, and we must do something about that. So I agree with that fully.
All right, you guys have some heavy lifting to do there in that department, and certainly let me take this opportunity to thank the entire panel for your participation today. I thought that we had a very great, very robust, very deep and incisive discussion on the 2019 budget. I certainly enjoyed a lot of the takeaways from today, and I actually learned a lot. I think it is important that we use the platform that we have as journalists to be able to eliminate those discussions in a critical and dispassionate manner. Let me thank my viewers for joining us for another Bubb Report installment. And next week, we will attempt to have a wrap-up of the budget discussion with representation from the government side as they move into finalizing the budget debate in the lower house before we begin those discussions in the Senate. And I also want to thank my hardworking producers on the ground in Grenada, who every week has been very instrumental in getting our guests together for this program. So, folks, thank you. Have a great week. For those of you in North America, please ensure that you're staying safe, mask up, and social distance. Have a great week. Bye-bye.